that this microphone that I have on is okay. Can everybody hear me in the back? All right, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to 100 Years of Grace. And before I begin, I do have to give credit to Bob Lee and our former pastor, Jim Olson, who on our 75th anniversary did an extensive history of our church, which is in one of these books over here if you're interested at all in that. So thank you to Bob Lee and to Pastor Olson. I'd like to introduce our panel today. You all know Robin Baldwin, and we have DeWayne Hayes, Marianne Stroschein, and Ruth Mechling, who will be sharing some memories from Grace. So this is our logo that we used during our 100th anniversary. It was made by one of the artists out at Tom's Tees. So we used that on our shirts, and we were going to do many things during 2020, but as you know, that didn't always happen. So let's begin at the beginning. The beginnings of Lutheranism here on this part of the state in the Sturgis area actually began about 30 years before our Grace Lutheran was developed in 1920. And you know, the early services were to provide ministry for all those immigrants and settlers that were coming to the area, especially the Scandinavians and the German Lutherans. So in 1878, just 2 years before the discovery of gold, a Danish-Norwegian Lutheran missionary, and you see his name there, Reverend Klaus Clausen, included Sturgis on his 2-month missionary trip to the Black Hills. And I just thought it was kind of clever what he wrote about this part of the country. This is what he said. Near Whitewood Creek, as well as some places above and below Fort Meade, I saw that some of the Scandinavians in the Black Hills and the surrounding area are able, enterprising, and respectable people, well off and commanding well-deserved respect. But it is not to be denied that a significant number of the Scandinavians up there, especially the unmarried men, or those that have left their families elsewhere, live a careless and depraved life, always wasting their earnings in drink and all kinds of lewdness, undermining their health and hastening their everlasting damnation. So you see, there was definitely a need for churches in our side of the state. There were various early Lutheran efforts in Sturgis, and the Record, which was a Sturgis local newspaper, included an announcement as early as 1895 to have a German Lutheran service held at Presbyterian Church on the following Sunday at 2 p.m. Then, in 1920, the biggest news for the Lutherans was found in the local newspaper. They reported that Reverend A.H. Trigstad of Leeds City would hold a service on Sunday, May 23rd at City Hall in English. So what was happening here in Sturgis around those days in the 1920s? From newspaper history that was recorded by Bob Lee, we see that it was indeed the Roaring Twenties. However, we know that that boon would soon go bust at the end of that decade. Sturgis was only a small town. We only had 1,250 folks here, and it was not enjoying the boon like the rest of the country because of an economic downturn that we had in 1920. Fort Meade was virtually shut down, and as you know, most of the merchants here in town, you know, wanted the men to come to town to buy things. Well, it was almost shut down, and its garrison was down to only a caretaker staff when the war ended. And then the important thing for us, the 19th Amendment was passed, and that was the women's right to vote, and the 18th Amendment, which was prohibition, which probably wasn't so good for Sturgis and our economy. And here in town, Reverend C.D. Erskine, a famous name here in Sturgis, pastor of the First Presbyterian Church of Sturgis since 1906, was elected then to represent Meade County in the state senate in 1920. Ed Galvin was a local businessman, and he was elected to be mayor. And I read from Bob's book, he was instrumental in getting the city council to pave Junction Avenue. The Majestic Theater on Main held the 1920 commencement programs for both the high school and St. Martin's Academy. I think I read there were 10 from the high school and 4 from the academy that graduated that year. You can also see the 5 churches that were in Sturgis when Grace was organized. Now, on this next slide, you see the old city hall, and people who were working to establish a Lutheran congregation continued to use that city hall rent-free, by the way, for meetings and services which they were able to arrange. That was the good old days, things for free. In 1920, also in May, that first service that was conducted by Reverend Trigstad of Lead was held in this old city hall, and you can see the folks gathered there outside. And then our birthday is October 27th, 1920, and that was when the Constitution was adopted. Now, it extended voting membership to males, not surprising, age 21, but it was not voted upon until they included females aged 18 and older. So I guess we Lutheran women were kind of strong in those days also. So yay for us. They also voted to belong to the English Association of Congregations because they really felt that English should be used and not Norwegian. Immigrants were fastly becoming Americanized, and they knew that English was a necessity. Also at this time, a ladies' aid was organized, very key to the history of Grace Lutheran. Then we have a picture here of Reverend Haug. I think that's right, Haug. He succeeded then Pastor Trigstad, and he was a first call pastor, and he not only did Sturgis, but he also was the pastor in Lead and Whitewood. And I also want to read his recollection of his first visit to Sturgis. We drove down the mountain road to Sturgis to visit the people of Grace Church. We stopped at a prominent business to inquire, can you tell me where Grace Lutheran Church is located? Haven't heard of it. We inquired at another business place. Same reply, never heard of it. Well, somewhat discouraged, we stopped at the bank. Surely they would know, but got the same reply. So with a heavy heart, I turned to walk to the door when the teller said, well, wait a minute. Seems to me that my milkman might be a Lutheran. Maybe he could help you. So he gave me the address and I drove to the house. Sure enough, the man of the house was one Mr. Hoyle. And he happened to be the secretary of that small group known as Grace Lutheran Church. A membership of about 18 women and 8 to 10 men. We stayed at the Hoyle house several times after that. So Haug was here until 1925, and during this time, he, together with the Ladies' Aid president, Mrs. W.A. Thurston, who's pictured there, and the secretary, Mrs. John Hoyle, who is not pictured right there, but her husband is on the bottom, were chiefly responsible for a building campaign. What they did was they sent out letters to over 2,500 people asking for donations to put up a building for the church. And they netted about $2,600. So on December 21st, the women, Mrs. Thurston, presented that deed for the lots on the corner of First and Sherman as a Christmas gift to the congregation. Also at this time, there were some new Lutherans that had moved to the area, and among them were Mr. and Mrs. Joe Aga. And Mrs. Clara Aga, who I've got who's pictured there, was the church organist beginning in 1924 on Christmas Day. And she played an organ that was purchased and donated by Mr. John Hoyle at the bottom. In 1926, the membership included 14 families as members. And Reverend Reuben Aga, who is a pastor in Lead, and Reverend Steeler, pastor at Newell, conducted services until Reverend Melmead was installed. So the first Sunday school was developed in 1927 at the home of Mrs. Bertha White. And Carol Aga just told me that her house was located where the Catholic Church parking lot is, and right beside them was the Agas. Am I right, Carol?
That's right.
All right, so they were very close to the church, and that's where the first Sunday school was. And Bertha shared that leadership with Clara Aga and Mrs. Roy Olson. From 20 to 26, the congregation thought about building a brand new church. And the building committee, chaired by Mrs. White, was formed, and in 1927 a plan was accepted for a 30 by 50 stucco building for the cost of $5,480. But bad weather set in when they were going to lay the cornerstone, and so they did have the service there at the City Hall on September 25th, with the first service held on December 11th, 1927, one of the coldest days of the winter. By January of 28, the Ladies' Aid was really concerned with how they were going to pay for this church. So the ladies decided to serve weekly dinners at the Rotary Club as a means of fundraising to pay for the church. And then on April 28, 1928, the new church was dedicated. In 1929, Reverend Suby came to serve Whitewood and Sturgis, and during his time, several ministry features were introduced. One was the senior choir, which still sings today at our church, a junior choir, and I even read that that's the first time they had a Christmas tree, was in 1929 in the church. Then Reverend Skingrud was called in 33. And in 35, the congregation voted to purchase the lots east of the church building for a parsonage. And those were, the lots were purchased for $350 from R.E. Sparks. And Henry DeWitt and Roy Olson were hired to build that parsonage for 50 cents and 35 cents an hour. Not much, but maybe a lot for those days. But they were instructed, use as much free labor as could be secured. In December of 1940, then, Grace called Ralph Oakland, and he served the armed forces as a chaplain out at Fort Meade, along with being our minister. And there, he was one that worked with the German prisoners. I know we've had programs about that before. He worked with those German prisoners of war that were brought here from Fort Robinson, Nebraska, to work in the sugar beet fields and for the harvest at Vail. And then in 1941, a board of deacons, which was the forerunner of our church council, that's the first time they were organized, and their president was another famous person in Sturgis, E.E. Grunwald. And he, of course, was the longtime superintendent here in Sturgis. So the church purchased a lot on which to build the 30 by 70 foot Sunday school building, and plans had to be put on hold that year because the supplies were limited and there were many building restrictions because of the war. Reverend Melvin Bramer came to Sturgis from Butte, Montana, and he preached his first sermon as a new pastor, brand new pastor, January 5th, 1947. So I thought this was also kind of an entertaining way that he described Sturgis. We'll never forget our trip from Butte to Sturgis right after Christmas Eve in 1946. For 3 days, we drove our old Ford, pulling a two-wheel trailer in a snowstorm over the mountains, and then below zero temperature. Sally and I had our two little ones with us, Carolyn 3 and Louise not quite a year, with us on that dangerous trip. We arrived at the Sturgis parsonage after dark on the third day. The lights were all on, it was warm, the furniture was all in place, and even the beds were made. And the refrigerator was full of food. What a welcome, what a surprise and blessing. And I hope we are the same way now. Then the polio epidemic hit Sturgis late in 1948, and Vacation Bible School had to be rescheduled because the Community Board of Health banned all public events and even limited all the attendance at the high school commencement. So then the Sunday school building had been put on hold, but finally became a reality in the fall of 1950. The cornerstone was laid on November 5th, 1950. In 1952, because there wasn't any public kindergarten in Sturgis, Grace Lutheran started holding kindergarten at this time at our church. And the teacher was our parish worker. In 1954, while Reverend Verlin Smith was serving the church, the congregation voted unanimously to build a new church. In 1956, Pastor Brody came to Grace to serve. And then in 58, a new parish worker was hired, Miss Lenore Anderson from Illinois, better known to us as Lenore Hines, Dr. Hines' wife. So Robin was a youngster at that time, and she has some memories to share. So we'll hear from Robin.
Hard act to follow. I don't do speaking like her. Anyway, as this says, I'm part of 5 generations of Grace Lutheran. My grandmother on my mom's side, Tina Escott, and her husband Bert, went to the Lutheran church. And then my mom, of course, started. I don't know when either of those people started with the church because I never asked. And, you know, once those people are gone, you don't have anybody to refer back to. But I do know that I was baptized through Grace Lutheran, and then, because my mom was there, of course, and then my husband, Pat, who's also a member of Grace, and I raised our children at Grace, and our middle daughter moved back, and now she is a member of Grace, and her kids come, so they are the 5th generation of my family. So what you're seeing up here is the kindergarten class that I was in.
Oh, wow.
So,
I couldn't find you though.
well, I can show you where I am. Anyway, of course, my earliest memories of the church are kind of after that because we don't remember a lot before we're 5. I do remember the old church. I don't remember my baptism. I was 5 months old. But anyway, we did Sunday school and those kinds of things there. But this was the class of 58, 59. So, I'm right here. And I've taken this photo to a number of class reunions, trying to find out if anybody recognizes themselves, and we've identified quite a few. And the ones that are still around here, I recognize. But probably my biggest memory of that has nothing to do with the church, but the fact that Kenny Miller, whose parents were also part of our church, and I both went to kindergarten. He's sitting next to me. Our families were very good friends. But when kindergarten was over, he and I would walk up Sherman to the courthouse. I would take a left down to my parents on 5th Street. He would take a right. He would go down the Catholic paths, as we refer to the paths on that hill, and across Main, and then over and across Lozelle to Dudley Street, where his family lived. And when I talk about that, my kids are like, your parents were crazy, letting 5-year-olds, just walk around. But that was the way it was in those days. So anyway, let's see. I started to think about this, and we're 102 years old as a church. I've been there for almost 70 years of that. So almost 70% of the church's existence. And so I was kind of like, okay, what am I going to do here to kind of hit all these different things? And I decided I'm going to have to do this in chronological order. It's just going to be all over the place. So anyway, I do remember when they decided to move the old church, and they moved it up on Baldwin and Marshall. And I do remember going to the Dakota Theater where we held services during the time that the other one was being built. And I remember the dedication of the new church and, that part of it. But then my memories really start clicking in when you get up a little ways in age so you can remember things. That new church was dedicated in 1960. Pastor Brody, who we saw earlier, was the first minister that I really have a recollection of. And I think it was probably because he had kids my age. And as I looked back through history, it was the kids in the church that left the impressions. That's who you associate with. And so, those are the people that I remember very clearly. He had all girls, and one of them was real close to my age, and one was older and another younger. I think there's two older maybe. Anyway, he left Grace Lutheran in '63, and by then I was 10, so I was, getting to where I remembered a lot more. During the time after he left, Chaplain Cleveland, who I think many of you probably know, was the interim pastor. And he was from the VA. He was the chaplain out there. And I remember him vividly because my grandmother, Tina, who was the original one, babysat for them. And so we were around the Cleveland kids a lot, got to know both he and his wife. And then from there, it was I think 1964 when Gilbertsons came. And again, Gilbertsons had kids our age. And my husband, who joined the church like when he was in junior high, and was confirmed there, actually, I think probably joined because of the Lutheran girls. One of them would have been Julie Gilbertson, and the other Gilbertsons. They've remained friends, over years. So anyway, the early parts, before we get up to my confirmation years, the early years for me in the church, there was Sunday school, there was Bible school, there was going to church every Sunday. I had 5 brothers. We filled a pew. They behaved like some of the young men in our church now. There was lots of this going on and lots of laughing and mom biting her tongue. But anyway, that's what we did. But the most important thing was the Grace Lutheran Church camps, Outlaw Ranch. So many good memories. And we went with, all of our friends, and I think I started probably my 3rd grade year was probably the first time that I went. I lost a tooth there. The tooth fairy found us. One year I was in a cabin that leaked when it rained and woke up and my bed was soaked. And so I climbed in with my counselor, who was a young black woman from Africa that had a very strong accent, wonderful person, so good memory. While Gilbertson was there was when I was confirmed, and this is my confirmation picture, and there were a lot of us. And I think probably the largest confirmation class that Grace has seen. And in that picture, there are many, many people whose parents were long-term members. Lots of us grew up and moved away, but their parents were there. And so Eldon Herring, I had, Joe was in my class. There were just all kinds of people in that. One of the Millers, on and on. Larry Hines, Dr. Hines, all of those people. Yeah, so many names. A Morrison, a Scavane, on. And, and that was a wonderful generation of people, our parents. And now a lot of them are gone, and of course, the most recent would be Ernie Miller and Dodie Lee, who, those people always stayed in touch with you. Yeah, I mean, when they saw you, Eldon was way into his hundreds and still knew me, talked to me whenever he saw me. The same with Dodie and lots of different people. So, I think that generation of people that brought us into the church were very influential. And one of those, of course, was my mom. And my mom set a very, very good role model for us, and probably one I could never live up to in all reality, because anybody that knew her, know that she was always busy, always helping, and she had a memory that was just incredible. If she was still here, I could say to her, well, when did you join the church? And she would know. And when did Grandma Tina join the church? All I know is that my Grandma Tina her maiden name was Schradel, that's quite German, and she was raised in Wisconsin on a dairy farm, and I'm sure that because of her, that's where we became Lutherans, and that's kind of the way it is. It's handed down generation to generation. There was another camp, Atlantic Mountain, which was in a different part of the hills on the other side of Custer. And I went to there when I was older. That was a rustic camp, and you took all your gear and then you backpacked into the hills. We didn't sleep out there. Almost did, because we got lost, but so different memories, but also very good memories. In the early years, Outlaw Ranch sometimes had family camp. And so I remember going with my parents, my brothers, all these other families and all these kids, and that was an incredible experience. At those camps, you rode horses, you hiked. We would hike from Outlaw to Stockade Lake and swim. All of this was mixed in with these services that we had in the barn or outside, and the singing and the counselors and even KP, all the things that you did were in such good company and such important parts of our development. When I got into my high school years, and I was confirmed in '68, which I think I was probably a sophomore at that time. I'd have to do the math and go back. But anyway, we had what we called Luther League. That was our youth group. And that, of course, was one of my favorite parts of church. When I look back, everything that was a favorite had to do with the other people my age that were there, that you associated with. In the early years, Keith and Ruth Schmidt were some of our leaders for Luther League, and that was very impressionable to me, because they were very young, they had little children, and they chose to come and help with high school kids, not the easiest group maybe to work with, but Luther League was really, really important. We did things like the summer between my junior and senior year, we went on a national trip, all Lutherans, to New York City. And there were 2 busloads of us. I think there might have been some Spearfish kids with us, I can't remember for sure, but anyway, rode the bus out. We stayed in basements of churches. We stayed in homes of other Lutherans that welcomed us. They took us to Washington, D.C. to see a little bit of the Capitol. So it's not really that far from New York. And I remember that real well because I left my purse on the grass by the Washington Monument and went back a couple hours later and it's still there. But anyway, then when we got to New York, all of our gatherings were in Madison Square Gardens. And I mean, that was a lot of Lutherans in one spot. We stayed in a hotel downtown. We went through Times Square, which was not what Times Square is now. We saw lots of things that were real eye-openers when you're from a small town like Sturgis. But really, really good memories. Gilbertson was there through quite a bit, so he's in this picture, and he left later that year. And then that's when Pastor Christofferson came. And he was there quite a while, so he was part of many things that went on in my life at Grace Lutheran. Let's see where I am here, kind of going off here, but anyway. When we went on that trip to New York, Christofferson was here at that time, because I remember him being on the trip. When I graduated in '71, I went to the USD for a year, and then I moved to Tucson for a couple of years, and moved back in the fall of '74, and that's when my husband Pat and I got married. And we weren't married in the church because we were married in my mom and dad's backyard, which was kind of a thing people were doing, anyway, us. But we went to the church and did the marriage counseling thing that you do before you get married, and Christofferson was there at that time, and he said some things that kind of went like this, and later kind of went, yep, yep, you knew what you were talking about. But anyway, he married us in 1974, and then in 1978 our first daughter was born, and we usually did family baptisms outside of the service just because of the size of family. And so we would schedule a time, and friends and family would come, and we would have 40 people come for a baptism, you know. So rather than have all those people come and be at the church, we did those privately. But Christofferson baptized my oldest, and then in 1980 our second daughter was born, and again we had a family baptism, lots of people there, and Chaplain Cleveland baptized her. I believe Christofferson was unavailable or out of town or something, but I have a great picture of Chaplain Cleveland with Esty, my 2-year-old, up in the pulpit. And I don't know if any of you know Esty, but she was vivacious and very talkative from one. I mean, she could say sentences, and she has never quit. But anyway, so that one took place there. During the girls' early years, I helped with Bible school, Sunday school, all those kinds of things. As they got older, helped with youth group. I don't think we called it Lutheran League anymore at that point, but we had very active youth group when my girls were young. And I always said that as long as I had kids, I was going to focus on serving with whatever evolved around them. Little did I know that that was going to go on for a very long time, because when my girls were 13 and 15 in 1993, I had my son Tabor. And so by the time they graduated, he was only 5, and then I started all over again with Sunday school, Bible school, youth group, all the things that you do. Anyway, he was involved in all the same things. The difference was that that's when we started doing Wednesday Night Live, which was a Wednesday night service, which the kids would come and gather and then go to the church basement and have a meal. We're still doing that. When they got older, they stayed after the meal and had like high school youth, and I helped with that all through his years. During that time, well, we'd gone through a couple of other ministers in there, but Pastor Olson came, and so he was there when Tabor was baptized, and also I think he confirmed both the girls. He was there quite a while, and he left when Tabor was in maybe junior high. But anyway, at that time, Pastor Fox came. We had some interims and stuff go on, and many of you probably remember Pastor Fox.
We're going to talk about all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and he was just a wonderful person, and he passed away Tabor's senior year in the fall. And it was devastating to, well, all of us. But those kids that had grown up under him, it was very hard. Between the years of 2011 and 2014, all 4 of my grandchildren were baptized. The girls weren't living here at the time, but when they came back, they baptized their kids in our church. My mom, who passed away in 2017, saw all of her kids, many of her grandkids, and many of her great-grandchildren baptized in the church. And I think that was real important to her. After Tabor graduated, I kind of took a break from everything, but they had approached me a number of times to be on council, and I'd always said, I'm not going to be on council until my kids are grown and out, so that I have time to dedicate to doing this correctly. And of course, again, I had kids at home for like 30-some years, so it took a long time, but now I do serve on council, part of the worship committee, part of the endowment fund committee, and have, been through yet a few more pastors. Pastor Will Olson, that was in around, was great, yeah. And then of course Pastor Chris. So anyway, I better but now we have 2 new ones, but Marlene will talk about that.
We're going to talk about all this. All right, thank you, Robin. What great memories. So we're going to whip back now to 1958, and many sites and building plans were made for the new church. And here's a slide that just shows the groundbreaking ceremony for that church on May 24th, 59. And as Robin mentioned, the old church was purchased by Trinity Lutheran and was moved off its original site to Baldwin and Marshall. And this is a picture that Bob Lee captured of them removing the steeple from that church. And I just talked to someone from that church, and I believe they've undergone some improvements now to that church. And actually, I just talked to someone a couple days ago who said, that's where our church went? They didn't even know that, so it's kind of neat to just tell people that have been members much longer than me where our church actually went. So while it was under construction, like Robin said, the services were held at the Dakota Theater on Main, and Vicki Monahan was one that mentioned to me that she remembered also going to those services at Dakota Theater, and she said it was so exciting to attend church and sit on the soft seats, and there's a stage up front, and one thing I thought was funny that she said that only a few of the spiked heels from the women's shoes got caught in the honeycomb floor mats in the lobby. So the next slide shows the laying of that cornerstone, November 1st, 1959, and then of course the next picture is our completed new church. The first service was a 3-hour Good Friday service with lots of Black Hills Lutheran pastors participating, and that was in May, and then they also had another dedication service later that summer in July. And here is a picture of the west wall. Many of you have been in our church and have seen that mural, and it was painted by Robert Aldern, who was an art instructor at USD, and he was also the son-in-law of Grunwald's. So that's our mural. And then in 1963, Pastor Cleveland was our interim when Pastor Grody left, and Pastor Herb, we know, is just so special to this whole community, and especially to Grace Lutheran. And then after he was our interim, Pastor Roy Gilbertson began serving in '64. That's a picture of him there. And First National Bank purchased the 2 lots on which our parsonage had stood. And the church moved the parsonage and filled in the basement, and proceeds from the sale were used to build a new parsonage on Fleet Street. And lots of volunteers helped to build that parsonage. And Pastor Gilbertson and his family stayed in the homes of congregation members until the new parsonage was ready. Then in 1964, the congregation voted to sponsor some delayed broadcasts of on KBHB, which we continue to do today. So I'm going to ask Mary Ann to come up and share a few memories of her time at Grace and some important things that went on.
Well, I don't have as long a time that we've been here in Sturgis at Grace Lutheran. Our family moved here in 1962, and we've been active members of Grace Lutheran ever since. And in listening to this and in reading all the history of our church, I came to the conclusion that the women have been a very important part and supportive of the mission of Grace Lutheran. I mean, after all, we bought the land in the first place, so they are important. Early on, our members hosted a fall harvest tea and inviting all ladies of the community to enjoy an afternoon of entertainment and, of course, pie and coffee. The women of the church have sponsored a father and son banquet for many years, inviting members of the community to participate. And there was always an enjoyable program and, of course, delicious food. As a fundraiser, the women began serving food during the motorcycle rally. First, it was Whippies at a motorcycle venue, a chicken dinner in the church basement, and finally breakfast in the church basement, which continues at the present time. It does take the whole congregation to prepare and serve these breakfasts, however. The monies earned at the breakfast have enabled us to have a substantial budget to support many of our mission projects as well as the church itself. It's helped financially with many roof repairs, new windows, new equipment needs, and whatever else was deemed necessary for the church building, even loaning the church $5,000 for current expenses at one point. And we have a number of ladies that meet every Wednesday morning for quilting. They have made many quilts, sending them to Lutheran World Relief, to local charities such as Women in Crisis, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and behavioral management in Spearfish, to name a few. Some of the mission projects, besides the mini quilts, was a sweater drive. Over 600 sweaters were collected, boxed, and sent to Lutheran World Relief. Along with a matching grant from the Lutheran Brotherhood, a substantial donation was sent to Cameroon for metal roofs for unfinished churches. Now, Cameroon, Africa, is a sister synod of our ELCA. In 1999, the women participated in Project Comfort, and $1,000 was sent to Lutheran World Relief, and names could be sent to be engraved on stones at the National Headquarters building. We sent the names of Minnie Harris and Mary Hildebrand, longtime members and quilters at Grace. The women also made puppets for our puppet ministry, and they sent 10 special quilts to Project Linus for us in American hospitals for sick infants. And the women continue to prepare gift boxes at Christmas time for our homebound members, filled with goodies donated by the congregation. We also serve soup suppers during Lenten, and they serve as the Altar Guild Committee. We haven't participated in the activities of Fairview Conference, hosting a spring gathering and several fall retreats at Outlaw Ranch. We support the women of the ELCA on a state level, or synodical as it's called, serving on boards and financially too. We continue to meet, and we have a very active organization. you want me to talk about the radio broadcast? Okay, Marlene also asked me to mention about the radio broadcast. In 1965, the congregation voted to sponsor the Sunday morning church service over KBHB, and the Brotherhood took over that project. First of all, they needed to raise money for this project. Now, Marlo Kincaid and my husband, Dale, spent some time on the phone calling many men in the community and inviting them to a steak dinner. Some of you may have been there. And they had a steak dinner with all the trimmings, and of course pie for dessert. Furnished by the women, by the way. Along with socializing, and I think they had a ping pong table and other activities for the evening. Bob Morrison and Arvid Mellon cooked these delicious meals, as I recall. This ministry became self-supporting with members sponsoring broadcasts and anyone else listening to the radio that wished to contribute. And I know that this broadcast can be heard many miles from Sturgis, and it's been a real blessing to the community.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Perfect. Let me just do that one too. So we'll hurry through this, and if you have to leave at 1, just feel free to go, because it's going to go a little ways. It is 100 years. So then Pastor Cleveland came again to fill a vacancy when until Pastor Christofferson came. And Pastor Chris, pictured there in the center, was here for over 13 years, the longest actually of any pastor. He was an Air Force pilot, and he also flew for the South Dakota Guard. Even after he moved here, and I don't know if any of you remember him, but people tell me that he was an excellent singer, yes. And that often he performed not just at our church, but in the community too. So during this time, Grace had started the Father-Son banquets, and they also had an over 30 club, and Robin mentioned that, of families that would go to Outlaw Ranch. And in 1978, the breakfasts were served by the Grace women. And I put Rita in there as our secretary. She started in 1979 and actually continued to 2006. So she, we all know the church secretary kind of holds things together. Grace Lutheran hosted the first community Christmas concert, and that was organized by Dodie Lee, who we've already mentioned, and together with Judy White. It started at our church, and if you were there at Christmas, we did our 43rd annual one. So that activity has certainly, gone through the test of time. And then Pastor Verholst came in 82, and that's when the church decided to expand the church and the parish house. And it was debated and debated and debated, and the long-standing debate was unexpectedly settled when there was a fire on September 2nd, 1989, and it caused more than $30,000 damage to the parish house. And that was when the Sunday school was taken to Tom Monahan's and Jan Weir and the Kincaid Funeral Home. All of those places donated their buildings for our Sunday school. And then Mick Hurlbert and about 30 other people took all the stuff from the church office to the basement of the Norwest Bank building, and that's where the office was. Then Pastor Olson came, and you see him there in 91, and people said, what in the world will a bachelor do with all of that room in a parsonage? I don't think he needs the whole parsonage. Until they saw what Pastor Olson brought with him, because he was known as a collector. And he brought countless boxes of antiques and books with him, and if any of you remember that, he used to host some open houses in the basement where he had his whole Christmas village set up in the basement, and you could go look at his antiques. Gordon and I remember that. We moved here in 93, and that was one of the first memories I have. I was going to his house and looking at that Christmas village. And at this time then, we received a large monetary gift from the late Rose Blair, and that really helped secure the funds to remodel that education unit. And that's when the two buildings were joined together. We put in our elevator, and that was finished in 92. And then after that, Pastor Wade was one of the ones that came in, Dennis Reich. And Dennis Reich was the one that helped start our Wednesday Night Live contemporary service. And that's the one we still continue. All right, then, like Robin mentioned, then our next pastor came, Pastor Fox. And if any of you knew him, he also was a singer. He loved to sing. Just talked about music. He'd bring me in the office and say, here, I have this CD for you to listen to, this Bach prelude. Or then we'd go through the whole new hymnal, every service. Let's pick out the ones we should do. And there is my favorite memory of Pastor Mike, because he was the Cowardly Lion in our Arts Council's summer musical, The Wizard of Oz. And he was in others, and you know, he loved to perform. And I wasn't going to say this because we're about running out of time here, but my favorite memory of that is we went into the audition with Pastor Mike, and I knew, you know, I was on the drama committee, so I helped hire the director. And he tried out, he said, well, let's let you read the Tin Man part. Oh, no. I thought, Pastor Mike, what is the deal? You sound terrible. I mean, it's just like absolutely boring. And then he said, well, try the Cowardly Lion part. And he went out, and the director said, do you think he wants to be the Cowardly Lion? I said, yes, since all he's been talking about for 4 months. So he was the perfect Cowardly Lion. Also at this time was when Rita and Ann Niffen, if you remember, she was our organist, they both retired in '85. And in 2011, Dale Lampier was commissioned to do our Jesus and the Children, which is the relief that we have in front of the church now. So we asked him to begin that process. But then, September 11th, 2011 was when Pastor Fox died in his sleep. And we all found out about it when we got to church that Sunday morning. We're waiting to have him preach, and instead, we found out that he had died in his sleep. So that was what we called tragedy. So I'm going to let DeWayne talk for just a minute. DeWayne, if you just want to stay there, you could just use the microphone.
That's all.
You don't have to get up here.
Good, I'll sit right here then.
Yeah.
Well, before we get to Pastor Fox, I was confirmed in the church in either 1946 or 47, so I've been affiliated with the church for quite a while, but then they ran me out of town for about 30 years. So I didn't have much to do with it, but anyway, I was president of the congregation when they hired Pastor Fox. Or I guess I wasn't, I don't know if I was on the congregation when they hired him, but he was a great guy. When they was interviewing him, we had a bed and breakfast, and so he stayed with us for a couple nights. And then he and Susan stayed with us 2 or 3 more nights, so we got pretty well acquainted with him. And one of the comments was, before they hired him, that he was in his late 50s, I think at the time, or early mid-50s, and they thought he'd be too old to have any association with kids. Well, when he was staying with our place, he was down on the floor playing with our grandkids. And so I knew that kids would be one of his high spots. And so we got pretty well acquainted with Pastor Fox. I drove him down to Rapid to the airport one time. He was flying into Minneapolis. And we were discussing what good drivers we were and how our wives was always condemning our driving and criticizing it. And we got so excited about it, I missed the turnoff to go to the airport. But anyway, we made it. But then on Sunday, on September 11th of 2011, about 8 o'clock, I get a call from, I can't think of his name right now, but anyway, I get a call and they said they'd found Pastor Fox dead, and he died in his sleep. So we called all the congregation members and to come to church early, and so we decided not to broadcast the church services that day. And but Pastor David Bear from Whitewood come down and talk to the congregation and give a very good talk and kind of got everything kind of settled in our minds and that, but it was a silent Sunday for sure. he was a great guy in the community. He belonged to the Kiwanis Club and was active, as Marlene mentioned, in the theater and just all around good guy. But the first pastor I remember when I was in high school was Pastor Oakland. I'll have to tell you this, that I saw him smoking a cigarette downtown one day. And my imagination was preachers and teachers didn't smoke or they didn't drink, and there he was smoking a cigarette. And I thought, what in the world's going on here? But I found out later after I became a teacher, they would both smoke and they both drink. From time to time. And Merlin Smith, he was a pastor there in the mid-50s, and we lost a baby, childbirth, and he gave the funeral. And several years later, back in the 80s, my wife was active in mental health in Minnesota, in the state of Minnesota, and she was at a meeting in either Minneapolis or St. Paul, and he was there, and he was in Minnesota. And he had married, I don't know if he was married when he was here or not, but anyway, his wife had committed suicide, and so he was active in the mental health in the state of Minnesota at the time, so that's kind of a little snippet that probably many people didn't know about, and I sure didn't, and she ran into him, and I don't know if he was still ministering or what, but anyway, he was active in the mental health in Minnesota. But Pastor Fox was probably one of the better ministers that we've had as far as in the community. Because we got a new one now, and I'm sure it's going to be great too. But, anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay, thank you, DeWayne. So after Pastor died, then Pastor Will did come. But before we get into that, I'm just going to go ahead and let Ruth go ahead and give her.
You can stay.
Yeah, I'll just stay here.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Ruth, and everything I've written down has already been said. So this is more personal. I came out here from the eastern part of South Dakota to be employed as a VA nurse at Fort Meade, and I had my membership transferred here from Zion Lutheran Church in Garrison. And then I met Bob Mechling, who had just come back from the Korean conflict. And before we were married, Bob said, we were going to get married, and Bob said, he's Catholic. And he said, would you be Catholic? And I said, okay, I would go for instruction. So I went for 2 times, and I came back and said, I cannot be Catholic, so apparently we can't get married. He said, that's okay, I'll be Lutheran. So Bob and I were married at Garrison Church, and we joined the Grace Lutheran Church in 1954. So actually, I am probably the oldest one in the congregation. Bob was brought up in the Catholic faith, and like I said, he wanted me to be a Lutheran or be a Catholic. I could not do that. So Bob was confirmed at Grace in the adult class in 1954 by Reverend Smith. Bob and I served on the council, and Bob served as the church treasurer. I am active in Rachel Circle, GLCW, Worship Committee, Altar Guild, Sunday school teacher, and 20+ years as the father-son chairperson. Some of the highlights of our programs were when Randy Brennick brought his dog sleds in and gave a program, and he brought 2 dogs with him. And then we had the rodeo clown. A lot of you people probably came to those banquets and remember some of those things that we did. We had the highway patrol officer and his drug sniffing canine, and we hoped that the drug dog wouldn't find anybody in the audience. We had impersonations of Elvis Presley. We had caving, and we had the Rapid City Raptors, which they brought in a blindfolded falcon and invited the children to come up and pet it. I helped Dorothy Short with the May Friendship for many years. And Bob and I have 5 children, Mark, Kelly, Todd, Chris, and Sean. All children were baptized and confirmed at this church. They all attended Sunday school. The oldest daughter remembers Pastor Gilbertson coming into the classroom singing, "My dog has fleas." The children were involved in all activities such as camps, teaching, escorts to the conventions, youth groups, and served on the church council. 2 daughters were married in this church, 3 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren were also baptized here. A little humorous note, my oldest son, who was 3.5 years old, and we had taken him to church, and when there was a pause in the sermon, he stood up in the pew and said, "I would like to see a cowboy show." Because his dad had taken him to a Western movie the night before. Also, when the Mechling family and the Gregor McFarland family sat pew to pew, giggling would start, and we'd have a discipline problem and a rearrangement of where they were sitting. So, I can remember when the children from the Christmas program were greeted with a large red apple when they left by the console. That's many years ago. Also, I can remember when communion was offered 6 to 7 times a year. It was important. Bob's career was the Army National Guard, ultimately attaining the rank of general. And I retired from the VA after 40 years as a registered nurse. Bob did, as the mayor, I believe, our 75th Grace celebration, the mayor, Chris Bob Mechling, did issue a proclamation declaring June 24th and 25th, 1995 as Grace Lutheran Church Days. Also, it was stated earlier, the first Grace Church was 1929. The present Grace Lutheran was built and held their first service in 1960. The old church was moved to South Baldwin in 1959. I have experienced 9 full-time pastors and 8 interim and pulpit supply. Home communion kits began in 2005, and new hymnals were bought between 2007 and 8. Our old ones were donated to churches in Vale, Newell, and Buffalo. The Caraway Street puppets were introduced as a new teaching skill, and we get turkey Thanksgiving meal prepared and served by the youth and their parents to the 65 and older. We have soup suppers during the Lenten season and Easter sunrise services at Lions Park gazebo when weather permits. Grace Lutheran Church has been and continues to be the major focus of our lives.
Oh, thanks. Great memories. Thank you, all 4 of you, for coming and helping today. So we'll just go through from 2011 to present, and after Pastor Fox died, then Pastor Whale came again, and he helped us kind of heal from that tragedy. And with a generous donation from Pastor Mike's memorial, then we finished the Jesus and the Children, the relief that's outside the church. It's pictured there. And in 2013, Pastor Henrique Fleming was installed, and that's when our Wednesday night kids program began, and we still continue that. We start at 5 o'clock, and kids come and sing and do Bible study and eat, and then we have church after that. We are blessed to have Pastor Will return in 2016 until Pastor Chris Garlick came. She's pictured on the bottom. And shortly after that is when we started to plan for our 100th birthday. And we planned all kinds of events. All things were going to happen during that year. And as you know, COVID also happened that year. So all of our plans were called off because we had to safe distance and avoid crowds. But God's work continued through faithful volunteers as we continued the broadcast. And Pastor Chris and the volunteers prepared over 200 home communion kits, which we delivered the week of Easter. And I also remember that Pastor had drive-by imposition of ashes. So you could drive down the street and she would give you your ashes on your forehead right in your car. And that's the other time we were really thankful for the radio broadcast, that we had that all in place, because we still believe that was a lifeline to our congregation. So now we're working on year 103, and one blessing we've enjoyed for all these years, and you know me, I'm the music teacher, I had to get the musicians in there. So we have had a long history of the music ministry at our church, and I just thought I'd put some of these pictures in there of the people that have graced our church, but not just the church, but also the community. And you see here Ann Niffen, who just, if you didn't know, she recently just passed away on December 20th. And Dee Sturgeon, we lost also Margie Hershey, passed away, and of course our dear Roxy Chowan. And Danny and Danalee still sing every Sunday with me. Well, not Danalee now, she just had a baby, if you didn't know that, so I'm letting her off for a couple weeks. And these are just some of the musicians that still continue to bless our church on Sundays and Wednesdays. And they provide the special music or lead the worship. And then the next slide shows our singers that have been in all 43 years of the community concert. And we've also entertained some of the Arts Council's music reviews down there, where you see us. And then we are hosting the 14th Easter Cantata. Those have all been at Grace Lutheran also, and we are looking forward to bringing that back this year on Palm Sunday. And there's a picture of Arvid Mellon. Arvid, don't frown. Now you're on there, you look great. John and Eileen, and all of them have traveled to that sister church in Cameroon, Africa, as missionaries. And our children were blessed by the Caraway Street puppet ministry, and we're continued to be blessed by Vicki Monahan, who has been a tireless member of our church and has had the preschool, she had the preschool in the basement for so many years, and she's just been a treasure to our church. We've sent the Easter Bunny out, as you see there, during Easter season to bless the children and the adults of our church. And there are some of the quilters that have sent hundreds and hundreds of quilts in our communities around the world. And now we are blessed with our new pastors. And we hope to continue our tradition of faithful work in the church and in our community with our new pastors. So Pastor Kevin and Carla, are you here? Stand up. Wave. So we welcome them to the community, and with our body of believers, I think we can look forward to the future of our church and our mission, which is seek out Christ, grow in Christ, and serve Christ. So to end, this was the picture taken when we thought we were going to be celebrating our centennial, and certainly we're not able to continue all those activities. But I'd like to just close quickly, and I know we're out of time, sorry. Pastor Brody wrote these words, and it was a long time ago, but I think it's so apropos for us right now. He wrote this: "May this church serve the entire populace of the Sturgis community. Our purpose in the past, as now and for the future, is to be a friendly congregation where the individual soul is precious to God. we invite everyone to join with us in Christian fellowship and service to God, here and at home, and also throughout the world. So God willing, this will be our mission as we embrace another century of grace. So, thank you. And I think there's some cake left.